Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, everyone from wherever you join, and welcome to today's webinar on food and in particular, sustainable food procurement. My name is Peter De Franceschi, and together with my colleague, Josephine Hinz from ECLAY, Local Governments for Sustainability, I will be hosting this webinar for you today. And I'm very pleased to do that. I think I do not have to say why it is important to have a session on food, and in particular on public food procurement. In blunt figures, it's about 3/3, 1/3 of the world population is suffering from obesity, 1/3 is suffering from malnutrition, and 1/3 of the food is wasted. So we are really have an unsustainable food system. And most of the food is eaten in cities and is wasted in cities. So cities, local governments can play a major role in shifting, transiting towards a more sustainable food system. And it's also cities who are responsible or can at least impact on the food served in public canteens. So in short, sustainable food procurement is about the food served in schools, in hospitals, elderly homes, kindergartens. Then it depends also a bit on the legislation. And sustainable public food procurement ideally addresses three objectives. It's about healthy food, it's about healthy people, it's about healthy environments. So in a picture, sustainable food procurement, sustainable meals, if done well, you can address all the sustainable development goals in one lunchbox. So I would say what makes this session special, apart from the relevance of food and food procurement, is here in particular we have pioneer cities from both sides of the ocean. This makes it also interesting from peer-to-peer learning and to see what are the commonalities and common issues and what solutions are there to overcome them. Before passing on to the speakers and to an exciting poll, I would like to pass on to my colleague Josephine to say a few words also about, give you some context and about the poll and maybe also some technical issues. Over to you, Josephine.
Thank you very much, Peter, for this warm introduction. And yes, a warm welcome from me as well. Food procurement at daring cities. We really wanted to have this room kind of open up the conversation. How can we leverage public purchasing at the local level to buy better in time of crisis? Not only the climate crisis, but also in a global pandemic and a food nutrition crisis, what Peter just outlined, as well as many justice issues that are still there for us to take action on. And we firmly believe that through making better choices in how we buy and how cities consume, and in this case also choose to produce, is a major mechanism for change. So not only for this session, but also beyond, I really want to invite you, in case you're not already part of our networks that we offer, like the Global Lead City Network or City Food, or generally be part of our ECLAY community, to do so, to engage afterwards. We'll share a bunch of links in the chat, and also introduce yourselves in the chat from where in the world you're joining us today. Ask away any questions to us and our distinguished speakers. And to make you aware, we'll record this session so it's available as well afterwards. Now, we really want to hear from you. That's why we will launch a poll about the question, what can the unique role of procurement for climate action and COVID-19 recovery in urban food systems include? And this is multiple choice to kind of kickstart our discussions today. So what do you think? Short local supply chains, or emphasizing plant-based nutrition, supporting organic farming, working together with education agendas, tackling inequalities, or addressing the issue of food waste. So we just kind of want to get a feeling of the opinions in the room, the perspectives in the room. I'll give you a few more seconds. That's great. Almost everyone has put in. So Peter, what do we have here? See, the majority is with addressing the issue of food waste. And after that, we have tackling inequalities. How does that resonate with you?
Yeah, for me, it's always very interesting that with whomever I talk about sustainable food procurement of sustainable school meals, there are different interests, policies, and a top one, I think, where cities really can do a lot is about preventing food waste. But then it's also interesting inequalities, which doesn't come up so often, and here it's clearly 64%. I know that already in our presentations we will hear more about it, so don't want to say too much. And I think this is very important aspect, particularly linked to recent developments. So I feel when I say like it's sustainable school meals is like a lunchbox that when you open you address all the SDGs. It's for me it's entry doors to all different aspects. But I think it always needs to sustainable food procurement always needs to be adaptive to the local, regional, and national context.
Absolutely. And in this case, the poll also shows that there is not one that is not part of it. Like the voting is kind of diverse, represented in all the different options. Yeah, and with that, shall we go to our speakers?
Let's do that, Josephine. So I'm very excited and glad I'm here in Brussels. So a long jump over the ocean to the city of New Haven, to Lata Swami. She's the food policy director of the city of New Haven. Part of her role is to lead food policy projects, activities, and research towards protecting the public health and environment. Later, she managed the engagement with and provides technical assistance to governmental and non-governmental organization, public health and environmental research groups, food entrepreneurs, and other food-related businesses. In addition, I think that's also interesting that she's senior advisor in planetary health to the former president of Mexico, who is currently chair of the Rockefeller Foundation Economic Council on Planetary Health, high-level global commission consisting of the world leaders. So very excited to hear about the food policy in the city of New Haven. And without further ado, I give the floor to you, Lata.
Thank you so much. Let me get my slides up. Okay, great. So hi, everyone. I'm Latha Swami. I'm the Director of Food System Policy for the City of New Haven in the state of Connecticut in the United States. I'll start this presentation with a snapshot of New Haven and a description of the division that I lead. Then I'll move into some examples of work we are doing, which is quite preliminary, around institutional food procurement and local and regional food systems. And then I'll wrap up with a few lessons learned from our COVID-19 response. So first, just to orient you, Connecticut is a small state on the northeastern coast of the United States, where the orange arrow is pointing. New Haven is a small, diverse coastal city within southern Connecticut, where the yellow arrow is pointing. So the population of New Haven is about 130,000. So it's a quite, small city. The median income in New Haven is about 38,000 US dollars per year compared to 71,000 US dollars statewide. So there's quite a discrepancy. So that would, give you an indication of the next statistics, which show that a quarter of residents are living in poverty in New Haven and half are considered low income. And as is true for most cities, especially in the United States, really across the world, racial and ethnic disparities widen when considering New Haven's 6 historically defined low-income neighborhoods, which are predominantly Black and Brown communities. So as I mentioned, I lead the very small and relatively new Food System Policy Division within the municipal government. The division was only established in 2016 and was vacant for the majority of the time before I entered the role about 2 years ago. I'm the only full-time staff member, but I was recently able to secure some grant funding. So I do have a part-time administrator who helps me, and this has been especially crucial during the COVID-19 crisis. Given that the division is quite new, there weren't many plans or guidance documents that laid out the goals and objectives of the division's work. We do have the following food-related guidance documents, such as the New Haven Food Action Plan from 2013, created by the New Haven Food Policy Council, as well as a Climate and Sustainability Framework from 2018, which was put together by the engineering department of the city. But none of these documents mention procurement or even climate resilience once in terms of food systems, which is quite surprising and telling. The division's mission is to support and help manifest community-led efforts that envision and create an environmentally sustainable and socially just food system. We work across 3 policy priorities: health equity, socioeconomic justice, and environmental justice. Also, given that community-driven efforts are a priority for our division and the size of our city lends itself well to this kind of work, much of my work is done through coalition building approach. I work extensively with other departments, institutions, and through knowledge sharing networks from the local to the international scale, including ICLE and City Food. This has overall built a better resident-driven movement for policy change in New Haven. So we're very much rooted in community-driven policy change and kind of base building and grassroots kind of interest driving this policy change. So having developed these relationships over the last 2 years, they have been pivotal in my ability to respond to the stressors of COVID-19 on the food system, as well as set us up for building better resilience to future shocks. There are 2 projects that are in their early stages, as I mentioned, in New Haven that I'd like to highlight in this talk. First, I'll briefly describe the Good Food Purchasing Program, and then I'll share some about urban agriculture work in New Haven. In New Haven, we are trying to build a base of interest to determine whether residents and other stakeholders would be willing to adopt a values-based procurement framework into our public institutions, starting with our school system. I don't have direct decision-making power over the school systems in New Haven. However, I have a very strong and congenial relationship with those who oversee food procurement and operations within the school system. So this has been a very important relationship that I've developed over the last 2 years. I won't go into extreme detail here since we're still in the exploratory research stage with the Good Food Purchasing Program. But for those of you who are not familiar with GFPP, this procurement framework is based on a set of 5 values listed here: local economies, sustainability, valued workforce, nutrition, and animal welfare. There is considerable interest in school food in New Haven. The oversight body for the school system, the Board of Education, even created a separate school food service task force to examine issues around school food, both quantity and quality. As I've described, there are many opportunities for engagement and change in this realm in New Haven. So I'm happy to take questions around the details of where we're at, but I just wanted to first introduce that we are seriously looking at bringing this program to New Haven, as some cities in the US have already done so. So moving on to the next item, just last month, my division was awarded a $500,000 federal grant from the US Department of Agriculture to focus on urban agriculture. Over the course of the next 3 years, we will use this award to develop the first New Haven Urban Agriculture Master Plan, an effective, responsive, transparent, fair, efficient, user-friendly, and predictable but flexible plan to access land and opportunities in order to support the production and sale of locally grown foods, build community, improve public health and well-being, and provide economic opportunity, particularly in areas that have vacant or underutilized land and low access to food. An inclusive, community-driven process will guide the development of this actionable master plan and will build and expand upon work that we've already initiated in our division. To focus our efforts, we will prioritize 3 thematic pathways in the plan: creating an equitable and enabling policy environment for urban ag in New Haven, assessing the socioeconomic viability of urban ag and its related businesses, and mobilizing resources for workforce development and training in urban ag and its related businesses. Ultimately, in order to generate true climate and health equity across New Haven's Black, Brown, and low-income neighborhoods, we need to go beyond mere food provision and tackle the root causes of disparities in food access and production. Our proposed project will jointly seek critical strategies to increase access to fresh foods and build economic and climate infrastructure that invests in community wealth building and eliminating racial disparities. So why do people in New Haven care about the food their children are eating at school, or if they can control what they are growing? The next few slides, I'll give you a snapshot of some data that will put this into better context. So prior to COVID, across New Haven, almost a quarter of the city's residents were food insecure, which was much higher than Connecticut's rate of 12% and the national rate of 13%. This varies widely across the city, but it affects low-income Black and Brown communities at higher rates, as the charts depict. New research shows that these rates have likely doubled during the COVID-19 crisis. Within these neighborhoods, food insecurity is notably high among those not employed at 41% and underemployed at 53.9%, compared to 18.9% among those employed with a full-time job. Over half of New Haven children live in households that receive federal food assistance. In New Haven public schools, over 90% of children were eligible for free meals during the 2016-17 school year, an increase from 83% in 2014 to 15, demonstrating growing hunger among children. And we can only imagine what the rates are now given the COVID-19 crisis. And finally, as most of you know, a resilient urban food system is one in which residents are food secure. That is, they have reliable access to healthy, affordable, and culturally appropriate food. In addition, a resilient food system is food sovereign, meaning that people have decision-making power over where their food comes from. To build a more resilient food system in New Haven, we're aiming to create an enabling environment within which food can be grown, processed, and sold locally while also retaining access to national and international sources through values-based procurement frameworks. This requires sufficient natural and infrastructure resources being made accessible for both personal and commercial use and protecting growing areas against pressures from development. In this way, food value chains can be shortened, simplified, and multiplied. By doing this, uncertainties in the system are reduced, decreasing the risk of price spikes and shortages. This work will also be complemented by public education and the strengthening of community networks focused on food production, processing, and purchasing to enable families and neighborhoods to build their own resilience and food security. So, as I just reviewed, these are some of the lessons that we learned through COVID about how best to strengthen our local food systems, how to protect the land in order to have sovereignty over how food is produced locally, and how small-scale food production can be supported through municipal policies such as procurement policies. And that concludes my talk. So thank you for, kind of the general overview, but happy to answer more detailed questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Leta. As we just got here a question from Ioana Dascalopoulou related to your presentation. I will ask it to you straight away before we pass on to the next speaker, if it doesn't take too long to respond. So Ioana asked, which are the main factors that triggered this food insecurity in the New Haven area? And perhaps circular economy can play a key role.
Yeah, so there is a high level of job insecurity in New Haven. But I would say that what actually triggered this high level of food insecurity is historical issues such as redlining and kind of disinvestment into certain communities in New Haven. New Haven is quite segregated. So the Black and brown communities are starkly different from wealthier and white communities in New Haven. We also have the presence of Yale University. And so this creates something that we call town and gown relationships, where, you know, Yale has ownership over a lot of land and provides certain jobs, but it also excludes many people from those jobs depending on their backgrounds. So I do agree that yes, local economies could be beneficial in providing more job security, but this job security needs to come with an equity lens, so that jobs are actually provided across the whole spectrum, so that you're actually providing jobs to working class as well as, you know, white collar jobs within New Haven.
Thank you so much. So from New Haven, we move on to the city of Minneapolis, to Tamara Downs-Ray. She is the food policy coordinator in Minneapolis, Minnesota. Tamara leads the initiative Homegrown Minneapolis to improve the community's ability to grow, process, distribute, eat, and compost more healthy, sustainable, and locally grown food. And Tamara will talk about food systems resilience during disruption. Tamara, the floor is yours.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much. It's an honor to be here with you all in this Minnesota morning, and to follow my colleague Letha from New Haven. It is just so interesting to hear how many unfortunate similarities we have between our cities and the work that we have to do. You know, Homegrown Minneapolis and City of Minneapolis, here we are, like New Haven, have a population that has two narratives concurrently being experienced by our community. Here in Minneapolis and in the Midwest United States, we have some of the most striking racial inequities in the country. Whether you're referring to employment, whether you're referring to education attainment, whether you're referring to healthy food access, obesity, the list is too long and really too enduring for us as a city to tolerate any longer. We are known as the City of Lakes. We have many beautiful lakes in the city, as well as the Mississippi River that flows through this city and was the catalyst for history of milling and food production in this region and state, that has developed us into one of the largest corn, soy, turkey, hog, many different animals and vegetables and food products being exported from this city previously and region, really around the globe. Cargill, General Mills, Land O'Lakes are some of the food companies that are based right down the road here, just on the other side of North Minneapolis, which is one of these areas. If you look at the map on the screen here, the northwest quadrant being North Minneapolis, and some of those most stark inequities that were as a result of redlining, racist hiring, and housing practices and lending practices, really very, very concentrated area, both of poverty and non-white residents, particularly Black residents in our city. Our city has a population now approximating 429,000. We have a poverty rate of about 20%, which is unfortunately concentrated in certain areas of the city. And again, the educational attainment is really going to vary depending on which part of the city that you're looking at. Homegrown Minneapolis is the initiative that I have been honored to work for, and our effort is aiming to be an authentic partnership with the community to really help improve the community food system for everybody in collaboration and co-leadership model in order to expand everyone's ability to grow, process, distribute, eat, and compost more healthy, sustainable, and locally grown food. This initiative and the staffing role were really catalyzed back in 2009 with a process that was initiated by really a convergence of factors and leadership interest from the mayor, the city council, the city's health department, and the sustainability office has been a partner since the very beginning of our initiative. And really what this initiative did was to start by looking at what are the priorities at the time in the community. And what you'll see, which is not necessarily a surprise, is that we had a lot of interest in urban agriculture, and there were a lot of activists at the time who were growing food, and the city's policies were really outdated at the time, and both did not allow the production of food nor the sale of food that was grown within the city limits. And so we had then looked through that process back in 2009 at what are that set of recommendations that come to us from the community. And but again, back in 2009, it's been quite a change in the past decade and what the landscape looks like in the city. So we did that urban ag work that the community asked us to do, at least in changing our policies. We had a change in our zoning, which allowed nearly anywhere in the city food to be grown for urban ag. But as one can imagine, if you cannot access land, whether the zoning is allowing urban ag or not won't matter if the price of the land is going to exclude your opportunity to access it. But at least at that point, we did change policies across the city to allow food for sale or to be grown nearly anywhere in the city. And in 2012, we began the work with the Food Council. My role started in 2014, about a year after we developed and approved a climate action plan. But interestingly enough, the climate action plan really deferred to Homegrown Minneapolis in the climate action that we would want to achieve with food. So as I came in, the Food Council was really engaged in tactical work to bring forward those recommendations from that set of about 53 strategies and next steps that the Homegrown Minneapolis framework had indicated the city ought to work on. And as we proceeded through these intervening years, it was clear that we really needed a food action plan. And of course, that's no small undertaking. In the meantime, we looked at what frameworks might be a good fit for that. The Good Food Purchasing Program, as was mentioned, really is something that we reviewed. And I will say some of the characteristics of our city's enterprise structure are that our Minneapolis Public School District and our Minneapolis Park and Recreation Board are separate of the city enterprise, as is the county. And so the procurement that happens at the city level really is limited to our convention center and some more decentralized purchasing across the enterprise. Our city's budget is more than $1 billion annually, but the amount of that is spent on food directly is really incredibly complicated to track, and additionally is more recently limited by the policies that have been added at our city to prevent food from being purchased by employees for a variety of activities. So our ability to actually purchase food at all is more limited than in many cities. And we have a Minneapolis Public School District, however, who has signed on to the Good Food Purchasing Program, who is a national leader with their True Food program and with their Farm to School program. And they have, since their adoption of GFPP, really put money from their existing budget, as well as leveraged a lot of state and national funding to work with local farms and to look at the equity within those farms of the practices and of the ownership and the employment of who they're actually purchasing from. So I will say that our Minneapolis Public School District initially was surprised by, after having many honors over the years, the score they got on GFPP was one that they had anticipated being higher, but they have been working hard even since then to really look at the cohort of farms that they are partnering with and how that can continue to evolve. In our timeline, 2017, we also did sign on to the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact, along with many of our other city colleagues, and had at the time determined that we would need to analyze how we would implement that. And we ultimately determined that we would do that by looking at a food action plan development in partnership with University of Minnesota researchers who are now based at Princeton, Anu Ramaswamy and Deanna Boyer, along with our Food Council being the structure for that process, and our community collaboration really being essential to this being a plan that will help us to look at a more just and resilient food system, as well as a one that is co-developed with research, but with the community. So I will move quickly to the highlights of our work prior to that food action plan being launched did involve, as I mentioned, urban agriculture, where we now have more than 60 city lots being leased for community gardens and market gardens in the city, and a number of policies that have changed, but so much more that has needed to occur. So this food action plan process started in mid 2019. We had hoped to be finished with it this spring. We have 6 topics of focus: food justice and equity, diets and community demand, agricultural production, retail, wholesale, processing and distribution, food waste, and governance and finance. We actually do have a zero waste plan already in place as a city, which has helped in that category to have had much work already in motion, including organics recycling program offered to at least all of the single family homes in the city, with more than 50% participation within a couple of years of that program launching, and continuing to make great progress on that uptake, as well as looking at how to get the multifamily housing units easier access for organics recycling. Now, earlier this year, we certainly had some pivots that were needed to be made with the pandemic. In March is when our city began to see the employment closures begin. And at that point, ironically, we were hoping on the week of the first round of closures of employers due to COVID-19, we had been having our final topical session of the food action plan process, and we're planning to move to a deep community engagement process for how we hear from community what their priorities are. What happened, unfortunately, was immediately with the closures related to COVID-19, some very acutely felt unemployment in certain areas of our city where it is more of a both a racially concentrated and concentration of poverty already. And so that immediately was something that not clearly visible to us, but what happened next, as everybody may have witnessed on the global stage, was we had a very terrible killing of a community member by our police department, George Floyd, just a couple miles down the road from where I live in our city. And in the days after that, we had many of our corridors and grocery stores that came under a lot of duress from the unrest that followed, including largest grocery stores in the areas of North and South Minneapolis went offline to the community, and many of our cultural grocery stores as well. If you look at the map on this slide, you see this was in June 2020, the black dots were all closed food sources as a result of the unrest. And these included, as I mentioned, largest grocery stores in North Minneapolis, the northwest quadrant of the city. Cub Foods was the only large grocery store in the whole quadrant. And that grocery store went offline and is still under reconstruction today, in fact. And likewise, the Cub Foods grocery store on the kind of the south middle of the city went offline. And so what we were struck with was the accumulated burden that people were facing suddenly now an acute hunger crisis, in addition to the racism crisis and the pandemic crisis that had already hit. So what we also saw was an outpouring of support. If you look on the June 2020 map and then comparatively on the September 2020 map, we had what has been now called mutual aid, really amazingly materialized around the city. As I say, ironically, with the effort we were underway to build a food system plan that would help us develop a more resilient city that had this community collaboration as an essential part of it. What we saw was instead the community helping their fellow community members in this absence of grocery stores. People came together. What you see in the picture here is at one of the parks, our Powderhorn Park, just down the road from where the kind of heart of the unrest and situation occurred. We had people showing up for emergency food lines all around the city. And what we as a city internally discussed, we had all of these, as you see on the bottom of this screen here, mutual aid projects, and we have no permitting that really address this, and no immediate funds. But as we saw these efforts appearing, it was amazing, really, the true resilience of the community that was there. And really, we have been looking ever since then at how we stay in conversation with all of the Black and Brown community members, the BIPOC leaders from around the city who sprung into action in a just incredible, amazing way. Our Black, Indigenous, and people of color who had found together with their community food that would meet their own cultural food needs and their own geographic needs. What we did was provide traffic support, provide support and listen. And what we heard was the same things that we've always really understood: refrigeration, transportation. How do you actually build, when you're doing hunger relief, a system that keeps cold food cold and hot food hot and gets food where it needs to be to the people who need it? We learned just in real time the inherent waste in a hunger relief system and the amazing way that people can work together when needed, unfortunately, to help each other get food. So really, we as a city and as a partnership with community, work to identify and distribute funds where possible, and food where needed to the community where those gaps were. One gap was in our Powderhorn Park. We had a real concentration of Latinx community members, our Latino and Latina residents in our city, who comprise about 10% of the city's residents, are really concentrated in an area of South Minneapolis where acute unemployment was faced due to COVID-19. It became visible after the unrest, but truly what we understand is the approximate percentage of our community filing for unemployment being about 25%, and concentration of those residents being located in areas of the city really in very little access to fresh food during the time after the unrest, especially due to the damage caused. Fortunately, Our Cub Foods market did spring into action after conversation with community and open temporary stores in both locations in North and South Minneapolis, as well as shuttle buses to the other stores where the things like pharmacy and other basic needs could be met by community. So these two community markets on our Lake Street Cub location, as well as on the north side, West Broadway Avenue location, will remain open until those stores are rebuilt. And our Cub Foods grocery store has made a commitment to rebuild for community some of these only grocery stores in some areas of the hardest challenges being faced. Strategies of communications, collaboration, and coordination are what we have utilized during the response to the pandemic, as well as to the unrest that our city has faced, working with state agencies and local agencies to help distribute funding, to help understand what technical assistance is needed, to help ensure that there is transportation and equipment where needed for folks to get food and to get good food, not just something that will fill their stomach, but something that will nourish them and in a culturally specific way wherever possible. So I will say, likewise, our lessons learned here so far, you know, we've had a food action plan that is going to be a longer process than what we had originally planned, but we have learned so much in the meantime about the resilience of our community that was already there, but the structural racism in a community that is about 65% white, with our Black, Brown, Indigenous community members experiencing structural barriers to food access, but yet having so many networks and so many cultural insights that they've already brought to the table during their response to the unrest. You know, we will continue working together with the new partnerships formed and ensure that our food action plan truly will be funded and have the policies needed to better prepare us to have a more resilient food system for everybody, as well as the ownership of the food resources and the food you know, businesses that will ensure that in this transition from a rebuilding of the city to what the city will look like, that city is continuing to be owned and have even a greater ownership of our committee members who have been missing from that table.
Thank you so much, Tamara. I think especially after your presentation, if not after Latta's already, it's clear the link to food and the inequality. You also got two questions. I would invite you to answer them maybe in the chat. Otherwise, we will see if afterwards there is some time to ask them. Otherwise, I would also, for time reasons, move on back to good old Europe. So Gunilla Andersson to Malmö, the city in Sweden. Would also like to congratulate Malmö because just on a few days ago, Malmö won the European Ethical and Sustainable Trade Award. So congratulations. I know it because ICLE was also in the evaluation committee.
Ah, thank you. We are rather proud of that. Thanks.
Yeah, so congratulations. You, Gunilla, you for many years, over 10 years, you have been working on policies related to sustainability and food, public catering, and also about all the legislative issues around sustainable food procurement. And I'm really looking forward to your presentation, which is about climate-friendly, organic, and fair food for the city. Actually, you have over 30 years of experience on the strategic issues related to sustainable food, isn't it? So the floor is yours.
Thank you. I try to share my screen here.
Wonderful.
Yeah. Thank you for inviting me to this presentation. I will be speaking more on the public catering sector than the whole society. I think in Europe, especially in Sweden, we have had tax finance the school lunches for so long time, since the 1960s. So this is quite a large sector in our country. And since some years ago, it's also stated by the law that it should be nutritious to all kids. And I used to say, you might all know the big soccer player Zlatan Ibrahimovic. He's originating from Malmö, and since he came from rather socially poor circumstances, and very often the fridge at his home was empty. So I say the Swedish school lunch system made him the big soccer player he is. Without that school lunch, he might not have been the great soccer player. I don't know if it's true, but I know that he had quite a poor youth and childhood. First, some briefs about the public catering sector in Malmö. I should also say that Malmö is, you might not know, but it's situated in the very south of Sweden, in the north of Europe, and Malmö is the third biggest city in Sweden with about 340,000 inhabitants. So you know it's quite similar to Minneapolis, and since we have these school lunch for every kid and also preschool food, we have quite a large sector. So we buy around 8,500 tons of food every year. I should also say that most of our catering kitchens are in-house. So we employ the cooks and we buy the raw material for the school lunches. And we serve around 65,000 lunches per day in school, preschools, and elderly care, and that makes in total around 25 million meals per year. So it's quite a lot. And we have around 700 delivery points for the suppliers. That makes around 700 kitchens of different sizes. The amount of money spent on food is around 24 million euros every year. And the average cost of the food ingredients per school lunch is quite slightly under €1. And when you add the labor and the rent for the localities and other things, the cost per served meal is around 2.6 euros. But the parents doesn't pay anything for the lunch or the kids, and it's served to every kid. You don't have any special needs to get school lunch in Sweden. So it's paid by the taxes instead. So it's a very it's equal system for all kids. And as Peter said, I've been working in this field for quite a long time. I started in 2009 preparing the suggestion for the policy for sustainable development and food in Malmö. And it's mostly covering the public food sector, not so much the civic society. So it's more about the public catering sector compared to what Lafa and Tamara had told you. But the content of this policy is that we should serve healthy food to everyone with a high quality and nutritious standards. And the people cooking, the cooks should have high knowledge and competence to do their work. The food procured should be sustainable, organic, fair trade. You heard it pays off the fair trade demand, and also climate friendly. To do that, we need to have a responsible economy, to stick to our procurement contracts that we write with our suppliers to keep the prices low, and of course to reduce the food waste. That's really a big economic issue, and also really evaluate the food, have a greater value because it's very much taken for granted, the public food, since it has been a part of our school system for such a long time. And we also have some that the events and official dinners served by the city should also be according to this policy. And of course, to do this, we need to have sustainable businesses providing this good stuff to us. And we have some main aims in the policy. That is, we should say it should all be all organic by 2020. And you can, but what is why not 100%? Because we realize that there are still some small food items that might be impossible to get organic. So our politicians interpreted all organic by at least 90% organic. And I will tell you later how the results are. And we also wanted to decrease our greenhouse gas emissions by 40% from 2002 to this year, 2020. So this year is very crucial to see if we have reached our goals. But they are quite high aims, of course. And how has the implementation been performed? So we have worked a lot with our procurement processes to have a very, very tight dialogue with our suppliers and to have quite high demands on the products that we ask for. And as soon as there is enough organic or other kind of environmentally labeled products on the market, we substitute it in our demands. So for milk, for example, we don't ask for conventional milk at all. So I think 95% of the milk we buy is organic. And of course, as I said, we have to have a tight dialogue with our suppliers to ensure that they can supply what we need and to encourage them to go further in the supply chain to the farmers to say that we have a buyer that wants your products. And of course, we have to have all senior managers throughout the city on board of this idea to support it. And we need to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. There is a great change of menus to be done, and I will show you a typical menu soon. And then we have, during these 10 years, we have had a lot of education, especially for the cooking stuff, but also for the school teachers and care staff to have the acceptance, because they need to know why are we doing this and how are we doing it and how can you support it. And you have to be very patient. It takes a lot of time. So this is an example of a menu, school lunch menu. This was as you see, this was some weeks ago. And you can see the green arrows. These are the fully plant-based lunches, and there is also always 2 alternatives every day. So most days there is always a green option, the plant-based options. And 2 days a week around there are meat served, the red arrows, and once a week there is fish served, the blue arrows. The yellow arrows are the whether there's a choice of the kitchen. That is a way for the kitchen to make use of their leftovers from other days. So that is a way of taking care of or reducing the food waste. So then I don't know what kind of dish they serve. It's what's left over and taken care of, or probably transformed into a new dish. Or they have a buffet serving that day, having a lot of different dishes that is left over from some other day. So this is what it could look like in a typical school lunch. Just for you to have a picture of it. Then what is the result compared to our aims? This is from a cooking class we had. What the result of the cooking class on this picture? Now this is the amount of, or the share of the food procured that is organic, and we have reached 69% in 2019. And by that we are the second best, or the second municipality with the most organic food in Sweden. I see my time is running. The greenhouse gas emissions has decreased with around 40%. No, the aim is to decrease it with 40%, but we have reached around 27% of that decrease. But as I see, my time is it's ending. I think I stop there.
Thank you so much, Gunilla. 3 words that I saw repeated in your presentation were education. I think that's also an important part here. If I think about school food procurement, that it's not just about the food that is procured and eaten, but to see, for instance, the school as a whole, school food culture. That reminds me also in Italy, where I come from, there was a big court case which went up to the highest court, where basically the schools were sued, and the question was, is the lunch break part of the education program? And the highest court decided that it's actually part of the education, and that was quite an important result. And I often think, I see my own daughter, she has 20 minutes to eat lunch. I don't think that's so much food culture there possible. So
we really try to get that through in Sweden, but there is a large resistance from the schools.
Yes. So I have 2 questions for you. So I pose them directly. One is about the impact of COVID.
Yeah.
And the other one, just trying to. Where does this stuck? Sorry, just a moment.
Sharing my screen. Yeah.
And the other one was about the beyond training of school staff. Have you been approached training of civil servants to carry out innovative public procurement? So if you could quickly address these 2. So on one hand, the impact of COVID, and how if you train staff on innovative public procurement.
Yeah. Of course, COVID has also affected us, but as you might know, the school year 1 till 9, the first 9 years of school, all the kids were still in school in Sweden during the whole spring semester and also this autumn. But during spring semester, the high school kids, the age 16 to 19, they had this digital education, so they were not served lunch, of course. So the amount of food served went down very much, and of course the school lunch might be even more important for these people that happen to be unemployed and things like that. But I think we have tried to keep our society running quite much. And the second question, I've been actually involved in the procurement process, being the sustainable officer for the procurement process. So I've tried to do this together with my colleagues that are expert in procurement, and I'm the sustainability expert, and we have made this process together.
Thank you. Then very quick answers. Who pays for the meal? Is it government subsidized, or do the parents pay?
It's for the municipality, and most of the taxes in Sweden is municipal taxes. So the municipal taxes pays the school food.
Okay.
So it's by your tax payment, it's paid.
Thank you. And the organic food, when you say 69%, is it by weight or by price? Basically,
it's by price.
By price.
Yeah.
Okay. Then there was
And
a
we
last,
have, by being very strict in this changing to the organic products, we actually got very good price for the organic product. So that makes the meal cost low still, since we have a high proportion of organic food.
and how do you get a better price? Are you dealing more with the local farmers? Does the organic come more from the region and the local farmers, or from where?
No, unfortunately, we haven't come so far in that, since both because of the EU laws on procurement that you can't ask for the local. So we are trying to get other ways around that. But getting the low, it's by competing, the competition between the suppliers. So the one who can support us with the lowest price on what we ask for, and we ask mainly for organic products, they win the procurement competition, of course. So it's by this competition process.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So we still
Thank
have please. Wanted to add something, Gunilla?
No, I just wanted to say thank you.
Thank you. We now have time for at least a few questions. Are there any questions that you would like to include in your chat box? It's now your moment. Otherwise, you have to travel to New Haven or Minneapolis or Malmö. In the meantime, I could ask a question to you later about health. It seems like a topic that you are also dealing in your advisory role. So how do you bring in health in your food procurement, in your food program, and how do you measure that, showing that there's the problem. One thing is about equality, but it's also about obesity and malnutrition. So are you also addressing that? Are you measuring that? And what are the indicators? Because we often see it very difficult to understand in cities, but also in projects within years to calculate how sustainable, nutritious, healthy food can actually have an impact.
Yes, thank you. So in my work, I'm interested in upstream policies that are designed to mitigate the harm caused by structural and systemic inequities, such as the industrial food system and distal and proximal social determinants of health. So things like racism, housing instability, segregation. So I focus on those things rather than the downstream policies that focus exclusively on individual factors, such as health behaviors. Because in the way that we approach policy creation, we believe that it should be community driven, specifically by the communities that have been most impacted by these inequities. So as far as, thinking about specific data around that, I think, we would be actually looking at data that looks to eliminate inequity in the system as a whole rather than the specific health condition. And except for, if it's multi-year data, then that's helpful. But in the short term, we are also kind of focusing on this equity lens around the data, because, as we want to ensure that the work, focuses on the communities that are disproportionately experiencing food injustice and health inequity, so higher rates of diet-related diseases. And so if they need to be fairly represented in the policies. So rather than ill-informed top-down policies that unfairly burden Black, Indigenous, and people of color, it's more about kind of the social aspects of it rather than the actual kind of metrics around health is what I'm focusing on right now, because we are so early in everything, and the division has lasted has only been around so long, just a few years. So I hope that's helpful.
Thank you. I think we do not have so much time left to go into other questions. So at this stage, I would like, and I'm very happy to have Chantal Clément here in the round in the panel. She's deputy director of the International Panel of Experts on Sustainable Food Systems, in short, IPES Food. And Chantal has over a decade of experience on sustainable food system, working and researching on 3 different continents. Chantal, very good to have you in this round. We also work together with ICLE and IPES Food on several initiatives. And I'm very interested, Chantal, to have a few reflection from your side. And also, I know you have an important proposal for local, regional, and national governments. The floor is yours.
Sure, thanks so much. So firstly, thanks to all the speakers for sharing these very practical examples of how cities are really pioneering for food system sustainability at the local level. And I think we've clearly heard how specifically that sustainable public food procurement can really provide some opportunities to drive greater local and regional resilience on many different fronts. So with my closing remarks, I wanted to pick up on some of the threads brought up by the speakers, but also to broaden it out and really stress this need for integration, of policy integration, not just at the local level, but between all levels of governance. Because I think we have a tendency when we're all so involved in our own levels of action, whether it's local or regional, national, or even international, that we forget these important links that need to be made between them. So I wanted to raise some of these here. I also think it's worth perhaps a final reminder, as Peter brought up when we started this conversation, that tackling climate change and increasing our resilience in the face of COVID and to many other shocks is really intimately tied to our capacity to develop more sustainable food systems. And I think this stresses the fact that we need to have, we have the serious need for, as I said, greater policy coherence to affect these multiple challenges, whether it's climate change or biodiversity loss, the rise of diet-related diseases, which we mentioned, or even just ensuring greater food security and equity for everyone. And so for me, policy integration means that actions have to be aligned across different areas, as I'll explain shortly, but also between different levels of governance. So I think we know and we've heard that in most countries, whether it's again national or local, that the responsibilities for different policies affecting the food systems are really split across different departments. So whether it's agriculture or health or trade or labor at the local level, zoning, et cetera, that all of these different departments tend to set their own agendas based on different priorities and don't necessarily speak to one another. But we've seen today through these examples of these much more comprehensive strategies that tie in these different areas of the food system, that we could significantly improve sustainability based on these integrated approaches. I think we also know that there's some important inconsistencies between governance levels, as I said. We just heard from cities that a lot of food system innovation is happening at their level, but we're still seeing this limited capacity from the international and national level governments. They're not recognizing, perhaps they're not supporting city and regional level initiatives the way they should be. I think the complex rules on competition to select who you can procure food from, as was just mentioned, is one of the examples of this. And I think, again, these higher levels don't necessarily incentivize this type of innovation and experimentation that's happening at the local level. So again, I think what needs to happen is we need to have a clearer commitment from national governments to be supporting what's happening sort of at home. This leads me to very briefly describe an initiative that is being launched in the run-up to COP26, which is happening next year in Glasgow. So ourselves at IPES Food, Nourish Scotland, and a wide group of partners, which includes ICLE, are pushing for the adoption of a declaration that's hopefully to be formally launched at COP26. It's called the Glasgow Food and Climate Declaration. And what it does is it's calling for tackling climate change, so the climate emergency, through integrated food policies. Essentially, it's a pledge by subnational authorities to develop integrated food policy plans at their level. But it's also, as I said, this call to national governments to support them because we need this connection. Of course, it identifies integrated food policies as the key tool to fight against climate change, build resilience, and ensure all of the other co-benefits that we just heard of today. And I think, again, given the great innovations we're seeing at the local level, it's also this call to bring this critical role of subnational actors to fight climate change, not just national governments, to COP26 and bring this to an international stage. I think Peter also mentioned in the beginning that food policy, and I think food policy integration, is obviously a means to meet the SDGs. We all know that most of the SDGs are related to food in some way, but also to fulfill other agreements like the Paris Agreement. We also understand that declarations, there's many of them, And there's been many of them over the past 10 years. So, why another one? And I think what we're trying to build on with this is that we're really trying to build on what's been done already. So it's building on the Milan Urban Food Policy Pact, it's building on C40 and other calls to, again, strengthen the governance mechanisms for food system transformation. And sort of to conclude, I think we're really seeing real leadership on policy integration at the city level. So we're really hoping to keep this momentum and further implicate national governments to make the changes that we need. And maybe just to end off, if this is of interest to anyone, or if you want to follow this work, local authorities are already getting in touch with us to pre-sign this declaration, and more information on the next steps are available online. I'll share the website, which was just released today, in the chat, so it might still have some small glitches, but I think it's mostly there. And as I said in the beginning, I think public procurement is one real means for this integration to happen and to start redressing some of these deeper systemic issues that many of the speakers brought up that are at the core of current unsustainability. So again, I think we're all doing our part to continue supporting this, whether it's a declaration or other means, because I think these local level initiatives are really what allows us to move towards sustainability over the long term. And again, thanks to everyone for some great examples.
Thank you very much, Chantal. Thanks for sharing in the chat the link to the website. Well, we come to a close. Thank you very much, Later from New Haven. Thank you, Tamara from Minneapolis, Gunilla, Malmö, to my colleague Josephine for the lead and the support on making this session possible. This stage also thanks to you, the participants, for in the chat for your questions, and the speakers for answering them, most of them. So thank you all, and all the best for your work, your important work on food. And I hope to keep in touch.
Thank
Bye-bye,
you so much,
everybody.
Peter, for facilitating. Goodbye, everyone.